Okay, um, rebar configuration. This is quite important if you want to start adding details to these concrete connections and sections and plans. So I'm just gonna imagine I'm starting again another project, and you could do the same thing if you're not that fond of implementing the rebars on your own project and you're a little bit lost in that sense. I'm just gonna create a column and a beam to give a couple of examples of how the rebars are placed. Okay, so uh, remember first thing that we have floor plans, and you should also place under your sheets structural plans. And if you haven't done so, you can incorporate structural plans very easily by going to um, view, plan views, structural plans here, and all the levels that you have will be named here, and you can just select them, all of them, say okay, and there you will have a new set of structural plans. Okay, I'm going to create a very simple structural column, so I'm going to structure and column, and I'm going to make a rectangular in concrete, so I don't have any, so I'm just going to load family and search for structure columns made of concrete. Okay, I'm going to scroll in with the control play. I'm going to place a rectangle concrete column there and change it to be the 2430, for example. I'm going to make sure it goes from level 1 to level 2, so I'm going to say height to level 2, and I'm just going to click it here. There you go, and there is. I'm going to do a beam as well. Beam, search for a concrete beam. I don't have any, so I'm going to load a family, structural framing, concrete, scrolling in to get a rectangular beam made of concrete. I'm going to make a couple of them, one here, and then another one in an angle here. Okay. Now I'm just going to go to the elevation and see where I actually place those beams. As you can see, the beams are in the bottom. If you wanted to move them, I mean, I should have obviously placed the reference level before. I should have placed it as level 2, or I should have done those beams here. But there's always a chance of just, kind of copy them and paste them to select the levels in level 2, and then just delete them, or if you have to kind of move them or so. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna change some windows there. ZA to zoom extend, WT to window. This one has an offset for whatever reason of 9. It comes probably as a default from another professor. Top offset 9, level 2. I thought I said this clearly. There you go. Okay. So the question is how we start placing rebars into these units. Okay. So I'm going to start with a column. No. I'm recording it. But now you can hear your own voice in the recording. Hello. Anyway, actually I'm going to do now that a student spoke and distracted the entire recording process. I'm going to the beam and make the beam instead of the column. Okay, so for beams it's actually quite simple. I'm going to create a section, so I'm going to go to level 2, and I'm going to create a very easy section here through it, and you can go and see this result of the section. It's as simple as selecting a beam that is structural or a column, and this little button appears which says rebar. Okay, if you click on that, this comes automatically. You can just say okay, and first thing is it may tell you, because you might have some of the family of rebar shapes loaded, is that you don't have any rebar shape families loaded. So I'm going to say okay, yes, I want to, and you're just going to go to the structural and rebar shapes. So you can double click, and as you can see, each of them are a specific detail of a rebar configuration. Okay, I'm gonna just select all of them, select one, and press shift at the bottom and open. I mean, just for you to see all the families that we have with us. Okay, Okay, another thing I forgot to mention is that probably on your structural plans you want to change the way you see the plans. So you probably want to apply a different template of properties, meaning a different way of seeing it. By the way, by changing this template, what you're doing is changing just the visibility and graphics configuration, and you're changing the view range configuration that is in the property. So you could actually do it yourself in a more slow process, but we have a template to be able to apply it and change all those elements at the same time. So we can apply the structural framing plan, and in theory you don't see it here, but all of your structural plans should have that template applied, because it really changes how you conceive, where you're cutting the plan, at what height, up to what point you're seeing it, etc., etc. So it's actually important that you apply that template to your structure. And not that by applying that template you're going to see everything perfect. Oftentimes on your plan you might going to need to change the view range because it doesn't accommodate to what you want to see specifically. As a reminder, the view range, it's that tool that we can get in from any plan view and see where we're cutting the model, at what height, in relationship to what level. So, and how much you see above and how much you see underneath. Okay, so that's an important. If I went to view range in the structural plans, you see these numbers. It's cutting the level 2 at height 1 feet. But if I went to a floor plan, double clicking for level 2, and I went to view range, you see those numbers are entirely different. So obviously it makes sense. The purpose is to see the model in a different way, because to see the structural plans you require different settings. Okay. Going back to level 2, structural plans, and to the section. Okay. Every time you deselect the beam of the column, you have to go back and select it and check the rebar option and say okay here. It's a little bit annoying. You can click on this button that launches your rebar shapes, and you can see all of them here connected. We're going to just use a couple of them very simply. The first one is like a quite important one, rebar shapes. These are the straight line rebar shapes, and we're going to use as an example the rebar shape T1. Okay. So how does this work? First thing that we need to see is these options here under placement. Okay, we have parallel to work plane, parallel to cover, perpendicular to cover, and there's actually, if you wait a little bit, it kind of tells you how they're going to be placed. So it's just very helpful to understand in first hand how things are going to be placed in your detail. Okay, so if we just keep the first one, we go to the rebar shape, you see how you can get in and start typing in every point and start locating rebar shapes, in this case parallel to the working plane. If I say parallel to the cover plate, I can start even placing sections that come in the opposite direction. Okay. You can go back down to that T1 option, and you can change this to perpendicular cover or parallel work plane, and allows you to place stiffeners, which are the rebars that go in rings. Okay. There's another option, is the rebar set. And by the way, what am I doing here? It feels like I'm actually annotating. It feels like I'm actually drawing in 2D. I'm going to go and take this to detail, fine, and thin line. Okay, so we see more what's happening. You have the rebars, you even have the section of the rebars, but is it only like a two-dimensional drawing what we're doing or not? The question is, well, let's go to the 3D and see what we're actually doing. I don't see much happening here. If I go to hidden line or wireframe, you start seeing that the rebars are being deployed in 3 dimensions as well. And only that, you can select some of these elements and change the properties for how they're displayed, if they're fixed number or maximum spacing, and you can locate all of them 3-dimensionally by changing. Sometimes you have to just select again. I placed, I think, feet. Okay, so you can change the spacing between to have more or less. You can also say that they're not going as far, so you take them back and forth. We also have these elements, which are the ones we did perpendicular, and we can also change their setting number, like number of spacing, and again, for example, 10 inches. Okay, so all that is going to be 3-dimensional. It's going to be shown properly in both plans and sections, because it's 3-dimensional. What I was saying about the idea of visibility in graphics, we can actually see this under a bit more compelling rendering settings. You could set it to shaded view and then go down here to what is called the graphic display and change the transparency level. So you see a little bit of that concrete texture, but at the same time you see the rebars emerging behind. So you have a very interesting sketch, kind of a diagram of or ghosted type of rendering feature. So in the next video it will be first of all the column and what happens if you want to do the same thing for this beam that is actually in an angle. Well, the first thing that we need to do is make sure that the section mark is located exactly perpendicular. If I place actually the section mark and I think it's perpendicular to the beam but it's not, and I do the same process, let's go to thin line, I'm going to go to the plan to expand that depth view, and I go to that section. If I select the beam, you can perfectly locate rebars, and you can, the same way you can locate the stiffeners and the rebars inside. But if I go back to the 3D, select these ones and change them to maximum spacing, it doesn't really quite work properly, because if I extend this element, look what it's doing. Now that's kind of a cool thing, but it's not what we want. So here's the problem. When I created the section of the beam, in the first one it was perfectly perpendicular to the beam, and in the second one it wasn't. The place you're placing your rebars is in that section plane, and then what it's doing is extruding itself according to the perpendicularity of that section. So the important thing is actually how you cut the beam in order to afterwards recreate those rebars on that cutting plane. Okay, so in this case what you will need to do is make sure that the section is perfectly perpendicular, and for that you could even do like a couple of lines first and make sure that you get the perpendicular view. There it is. Okay, and then place the section in relationship. Okay, and that's important for the column, because actually we first need to create a reference plane. We need to place the rebars in that reference plane. We're going to see that in the next little video.